So welcome back to another episode of Family on Friday. In today's case, in 12 Days of Murder, we'll be discussing the Downtown Posse of Dayton, Ohio, back in 1992. And so while this case basically took place about 30 years ago this year, so the anniversary is coming up, so I just thought it'd be interesting to cover, and let's just go and get started.
You had your fun, bet you're sorry now. You dressed me in white to just lay me down. I would've stayed till death took me out, but then you fucked up and gave me the gun. So I'll give you one more shot.
So of course we also always start with our killers. In this case we actually have 4, so I will be going in the order in which they were born. So basically from oldest to youngest. Heather Nicole Matthews was born on February 27th, 1972. Marvalis Matthew Keene was born on July 5th, 1973. DeMarcus Maurice Smith was born on July 3rd, 1975. Laura Janelle Taylor was born on January 31st, 1976. So that goes all of our killers, all 4 of them. Not much from what I can find was actually known about the 4 of their childhoods. Marvalis, who plays a big part in this crime spree, he would lose his brother to a robbery, so his brother would have been killed as a result of a robbery. This was said to have affected him heavily because apparently he was actually close to his brother. And so he would get into arguments with his family, so much to where his father apparently kicked him out of the house. And so, because apparently he was living with his father at one point, so he went back to his mother. And then he basically was estranged from his family. And so the sad thing is all 4 of these have in common, they were all eventually estranged from their family. So that's how they basically hung out so much. And Laura would one night suggest that they needed to get some drama into their life. And so Heather, Laura, and Marvalis planned to rob Joseph Wilkerson, born on July 3rd, 1958. They basically tried to lure him by basically saying that Laura and Heather wanted to have sex with him, basically like a little orgy. But really they were going to rob him because they needed the money. Because they were tired of panhandling, because it was said that they all were panhandling at one point. And so once they arrived, they tried to make it seem like we actually were going to go through with it, slowly taking their clothes off. And so it got to a point to where they kind of stopped and they proceeded to tie him to a headboard with electric cords. Once he was bound, they would rob his house and find a .32 caliber Derringer that Joseph told him where it was at so that he wouldn't kill him. Like, you can have my gun if you don't kill me, basically. And so this would be the gun used to kill him, ironically, and they would shoot him in the chest, putting a pillow in between. So I guess to silence it, so that way, because the gunshots wouldn't be heard and no one would come. Laura liked seeing someone get shot because then she proceeds to ask, can she shoot? And Marvalis apparently said yeah. And so he gives her the gun, it doesn't work, she gets frustrated. So then she asks Marvalis for his personal gun, which is a .25 caliber. She shoots him in the head with the pillow in between. So now he is officially dead because at this point he has stopped moving. And so at this point, the trio, soon to be foursome, have decided that this will be basically their headquarters of where we're going to meet at. Because I guess Wilkerson lived alone. So yeah, using his car, which will also be important to the story later, basically to continue their crimes. And so that same night, because it is Christmas Eve 1992, if I hadn't already mentioned this, they would come across Danita Danielle Gillette at a phone booth calling home. And so a little bit about Danita. Danita was born on July 6, 1974. In Dayton, being the youngest of all her siblings. She was said to have actually been a senior at the high school she went to. However, other sources say that she had just graduated the year prior. And so we do know that she was a mother to a 2-year-old girl. So it's that I can confirm that to be true. And so she was actually working at Rally's at the time to provide for her 2-year-old daughter, Dominique Deshawn Gillette, who was born sometime in 1990. And so that particular night, it was 19 degrees outside, and she was at the payphone to call to check in with the family to make sure everything was okay and to assure that she'll be home in 30 minutes. And so, however, unfortunately, Marvalis would put the gun up to the phone booth. He would shoot 9 times into the booth, 5 of them hitting her, and it was later shown that she was actually shielding herself and apparently even said don't shoot. And so afterwards, her backpack, coat, and shoes were stolen. And her backpack had only contained 50 cents at the time. The foursome, because at this point DeMarcus had apparently joined it when they were at Joseph's house. So after killing Danita, they decided to go back to Joseph's house to throw a party with the room that had Joseph's body in it locked off, because obviously we're not going to have that just out in the open, right? So then at this party, Jeffrey Wright, who Heather Matthews' ex, he would show up and then take her to the back room, dragging her. And so DeMarcus is dating Heather at the time. And so DeMarcus would apparently notice and chased him. He would jump out a window, and DeMarcus had apparently followed him and shoots at him 4 times in the legs. He would somehow get to a neighbor's house and wind up surviving the incident. However, sadly, Jeffrey never actually called police. This apparently had excited Laura and made her want to kill her ex. And so while the Gillette family did eventually get a call from Danita, sadly at this point it's believed that, like, she had been shot already and was dying because there was silence. So like her sister Rhonda had picked it up and she hung up because there was silence. She didn't know who it was. So the family would go to sleep thinking that Danita had been caught at work, because apparently that happens often, and being in the holidays. Police would be called that same night to the phone booth. She was still alive when they arrived. However, she was declared dead at the hospital, sadly. They would be noticed that there were .25 caliber bullets, and apparently these pair of bullets were very distinctive because they were normally used for like target practice, but still could be deadly if shot at close range, as we see with Joseph and I guess now Danita. Witnesses will say that they saw 2 males with guns running from the scene. Police would sadly go notify Danita's family of her death. And so, fast forward is the next day, so Christmas Day 1992. Laura would proceed to call her ex, Richmond Maddox. So, Richmond Thornton Ricky Maddox was born on December 29th, 1972. And so she would proceed to ask Ricky if he was interested in having sex at a motel, but he would have to pay for the motel, so bring cash. So I guess he agreed. They meet at a designated, like, agreed meeting spot. They get there, Laura gets in the passenger seat. So Ricky's driving, Laura's in the passenger seat. And behind them, but not too far, is apparently Heather, Marvalius, and DeMarcus. So they weren't like that smart at trying to hide the fact they were following him. So then, of course, Ricky gets like this bad feeling. He proceeds to start speeding up, because I think at this point he starts to realize it's a setup, because again, this is his ex. And Laura, I guess in a moment of panic, she proceeds to pull out the .32 Derringer, shoots him on the right side of the head. He is still driving the car. So right before the car hits a tree, she jumps out. So she's out, she's unharmed. Ricky, obviously at this point, is dead, because the shot was his cause of death, not the car crash. So his car is crashed into a tree. So now Ricky's deceased too. So then, of course, police would eventually get called to the scene of Ricky. And so Ricky was found in the car that had crashed into the tree. However, the actual cause of death was the .25. His actual cause of death was being shot in the side of the head. And so police then realized that the shooting between Danita and Ricky are related, because remember at this point they haven't found Joseph's body yet. Witnesses would say that they saw a young woman was seen fleeing from a car. And so when they questioned Ricky's family, the only woman they could think of was Laura Taylor, because again, this is his ex. And so police would go to Laura's family, and they would say they haven't heard from her in days, and that they are in fact worried. So then they would get another call 3.5 miles away at a local market. And so 3 people were on scene, and they all were still alive. And so it was Sarah Abram, who was like a clerk, Jimmy Thompson, who was like 71, and Jones Pettis, who apparently was just a regular customer. And so Sarah had come from Ethiopia, and apparently was a mother of 3, and her family had apparently actually owned the market that this particular incident happened in. And so Jimmy was actually a part-time worker at the store. And so I guess Laura had actually come to the store to buy gum, but was 5 cents short. But she was really scoping the place out to see how many people were in there so she could go tell the boys. Jimmy had noticed this, and Jimmy, being, I guess, the sweet old gentleman he was, he gave her a nickel, and she smiled at him, and she left with the gum. So then right after she leaves, Marvalius and DeMarcus would come in, both with guns. Sarah offered all the money that she had, which was only like $40 that night. They proceed to shoot her in the mouth and on top of the head. They shoot at Jimmy, who they somehow miss, but he falls on the counter, basically like pretending to be hit. So basically play dead, right? And before leaving, so then Sarah would sadly die from complications from her getting shots. Sources say 4 or 5 days later. She would die several days later though. And while Jones would survive. And so while police are still on scene at the market, they would receive another phone call about an attempted shooting at a gas station. And so when they get there, they find a Kathy Henderson who says she was filling up her tires for a Dodge Shadow when Marvalius and DeMarcus pulled up to where nearby where she was, went up to her, pointed their guns, and Marvalius had apparently said that she was going to die that night. So then they shoot at her, and luckily they actually missed. She runs to safety, but they proceed to steal her car. So then the group would actually remember that Wendy Cortrill, 16, and Marvin Washington, 18, had overheard them talking about the murders during a party. And so Wendy Renee Cortrill was born on June 13, 1976, and Marvin was born on January 14, 1976. So Nicholas Woodson had also overheard, apparently, but Wendy and Marvin seemed more likely to basically snitch. And so Marvalius apparently didn't want them to snitch, and so he would tell the two of them, like, you need to assist in the next murder to prove their loyalty. So of course they agreed, because they didn't want to be known as snitches, and they would drive. So Marvalius and DeMarcus would get Wendy and Marvin into the car. So then the two of them, they would go get like some beer and wine, apparently, and then they basically would drive around. So Marvalius said he had to go to the bathroom. So then once after he claims he has to go to the bathroom, they would drive the pair to like an abandoned area, and this is when they realized that we're going to be the next victims. So then DeMarcus told Marvin to get on his knees, and after he did, he would be shot execution style behind his head. Wendy would of course start screaming and trying to stay in the car. And so the two were sadly able to get her out. Of course, they had to work together in order for it to happen, but they were able to do it. Marvelous asked her to open her mouth. She does, and he tells her to bite the barrel. And then, of course, she does, and then he shoots her in the mouth, of course, killing her. So then they leave the bodies and then flee. And so then the next day, in all points, the bulletin will be out for her 1989 Dodge Shadow, which is the car that Kathy had stolen from her. A man would go... There was a sergeant at the time, Sergeant John Hubert. He went looking for this vehicle and would find it 20 minutes later. He called the police to run the license plates. However, the plates didn't match. And so the plates actually went to a blue Pontiac Grand Am belonging to Joseph Wilkerson, the first getaway car I guess they had. And so he thought maybe they gave the wrong number, and then he noticed a blue Pontiac Grand Am not that far away. So then, of course, he checks those plates, and so, of course, it was then discovered that those plates had been switched. So then they figured, we have the right people. And so they checked to see if Joseph had registered his car as missing, which he didn't, because, again, Joseph is dead. So at this point, Joseph is actually considered a suspect, which we know he isn't, but, of course, the police don't know that. And so the police would then go to his house to where they would smell like this really bad smell, because Joseph had been decomposing for the past couple of days. So then they kick in the back door and they find Joseph's body. So then, of course, the police would create a tip line regarding the shootings. And so that same night, Nicholas Wilson, who I mentioned earlier, who's like 18 at the time, he would call scared that he would become the next victim because he knew who the killer was. He knew that the killers were. He knew that they knew that he had overheard. So, and Whitney and Marvin are already dead, but of course they don't discover that till like afterwards. So during this time, John Hubert was watching both the vehicles, and so Marvalius, DeMarcus, and Laura would all come out of an apartment nearby, and Hubert could see their faces clearly. They get into the car and drive off. Hubert requests backup and follows the car. He puts on his lights, police lights. DeMarcus jumped out the front passenger door. So then Hubert and Marvalius, he yelled at Marvalius to put his hands up. And Laura was yelling to shoot him. And so he did, and backup would arrive, and they both would be arrested. And so DeMarcus had actually went back to the apartment, and Heather was trying to hide him. So then, of course, police would go to the apartment, and that's how they both got arrested. And so Marvalius was wearing Danita's coat, and DeMarcus was apparently wearing her shoes. And apparently they were Fila shoes, but I couldn't confirm whether or not those were even true. And so Marvalius and Heather were held on $5 million bail each, because they both were adults when this crime spree happened. Laura and DeMarcus, because they were minors, they were held on aggravated murder and robbery charges, but because how severe the situation was, they were held as adults. So then, of course, they decided to question Laura first, because, she's the youngest, maybe she's scared, maybe she'll talk. So then, of course, Laura, not only did she not talk, when asked, if she wanted, like, a bathroom break, she actually stood up and, like, peed on herself and then proceeded to sit back down. So then, of course, it was that the other three would, of course, talk. And so Marvalius, once it was determined that he kind of was a ringleader, he would be sentenced to death. The other three would be sentenced to life without parole. And this was because DeMarcus and Laura were still minors, and Heather got a plea deal. And apparently you couldn't execute a minor even if they committed murder. So Heather, of course, being an adult, she took that plea deal, so she didn't get executed. And so Marvellis would actually be executed by lethal injection on July 21st, 2009. And so his last meal consisted of a porterhouse steak with A1 sauce, a pound of jumbo fried shrimp with cocktail sauce, french fries and onion rings with ketchup, dinner rolls and butter, 2 plums, a mango, a pound of seedless white grapes, German chocolate cake, 2 bottles of Pepsi, and 2 bottles of A&W cream soda. So then, of course, that leaves DeMarcus, Laura, and Heather. Laura, because remember she was a minor, apparently there was this new law that passed last year where Laura is eligible for parole. I can't exactly find if she even, I would assume it got rejected, but I couldn't find whether or not she even has went through with it yet. It just said that she is eligible for parole, but she hasn't went through the full parole meeting. So yeah, that was the case of Downtown Posse. I hope you guys learned something new, and I'll see you fellas on the next one. Bye.